This is Caitlin Porter from the Mongoose Enablement team. Welcome to Part 5 of the Mongoose Hello World training series. In Part 4, we updated our items facility with the ability to import a picture, and we created the orders facility, which we used to create some orders. In today's video, we will extend the orders table further by joining it with tables and adding property class extensions to support drill downs. We will create a derived field for a calculation, and we'll expand on the inheritance model by building out component classes and validators that can be reused throughout our application. Let's start by joining a few tables. Open the IDO collections form from the list of recently used forms. The form will open up in filter and place mode. Type in orders in the IDO name and hit F4 to filter to it. Click the Tables button and then click New Table. This will allow us to create a table join or a reference to existing tables. In the table name dropdown, select our customer table and give it a table alias of CUS. And finally, let's set our join condition. Let's set it to ID equals orders customer ID. Hit the Add button and then hit OK. Then select the New Table button again. This time let's create a join to our items table. Select items from the table name dropdown. Give it a table alias of ITMS. And for the join condition, select item equals orders item. Hit Add and then OK. With the customer table selected, click the Bind Properties button. Deselect all of the columns except for address and name, and then hit the Massage Property Names button. Let's prefix these two property names with the prefix CUS. Click OK, and when you return, you'll see that it renamed our properties CUS name and CUS address. Click Finish, and now you'll see our two properties that were added to the Orders IDO. Let's do the same for the Items table. Close the IDO Properties form, and then select your Items table. Then click the Bind Properties button. Deselect everything except for Description, Cost, and Picture, and then hit the Massage Property Names button. And let's prefix these properties with ITMS. Hit OK, and then hit Finish to create the properties on our Orders IDO. Now let's add some attributes to those properties we just added. Select CUS address and give it a label string ID of S address. Then select our items cost property and assign it our cost property class. Select items description and give it a label string ID of S item description. Then select CUS name and give it a label string ID of S customer name. Select the items picture property and let's assign it the picture property class that we created earlier. Lastly, select the customer ID property and change the label string ID to S customer ID. Once you're done adding your attributes, save and close the form. Go ahead and close the IDO tables form as well. So far, all of the IDO properties we've used have been bound to columns on tables, but properties can also be calculations, input to server-side update logic, or relationships to other IDOs. Select the New Property button, then select Derived. Hit Next, and let's name our property dir order total. We consider it a best practice to always prefix your derived fields with dir. Let's assign it the cost property class that we created earlier. Once you select the property class, it should automatically inherit the data type. Let's type in our expression below. Type in count, space, asterisk, space, ITMS cost. This will multiply the count by the item cost properties to calculate our order total. These expressions are evaluated as SQL select statements, and property names in the expressions are case sensitive. Hit Finish to create your property. Let's add a label string ID to our newly created property. Hit the Properties button to see all the properties on that IDO. Select the dir order total property that we just created and change the label string ID to S order total. As you can see, because we are inheriting the cost property class, it automatically inherited the cost label. This change will override that label. Because this is a derived property, this property is inherently read-only. so go ahead and check the Read-Only checkbox. Save your changes and close the IDEO Properties form as well as the IDEOs form. Then, unload all the global form objects from Form Definition. Next, let's create property class extensions for the item and customer ID property classes to enable them to have drill downs. This is the same process we went through in Part 4, so this should look familiar. Let's enter Design Mode by hitting the Design Mode icon from the toolbar. Set the editing scope to Site Default and hit OK. Then open your Orders form from the list of recently used forms. Once the form opens, select the Item combo box. On the right, expand the Inheritance section. Click the ellipsis on Edit Property Class Extension. Select Yes when it asks you if you want to create the property class extension. Expand the Behavior section, and then expand the Add Details section. Set the Add Details and the Find forms to both our Items form. Set the property to Item, and then in the right-click menu below, set it to Standard Details Add Find. Hit OK. Let's do the same thing for our Customer ID field. Click on the Customer ID combo box and expand the Inheritance section. Click on the ellipsis for the Edit Property Class extensions and select Yes to create it. Set the Add Details and the Find forms to our Customers form. Set the property to ID. Then scroll down to the right-click menu and set it to Standard Details Add Find. Hit OK, then save and close your form. Now that we have added more properties to our Orders IDEO, I want to recreate my Orders form with the new properties instead of having to manually add each one. To do this, I'm going to replace our old Orders form with a new one using the new Form Wizard. While in Design Mode, select the new Form Definition icon from the toolbar. For the category, select Classic, and for the wizard, select Multiview. For the name, select our existing Orders form. For the data source, select our Orders IDEO. Hit Next, and when it asks you if you want to replace your existing form, hit OK. Now, let's add some of our new properties that we created onto our new form. Click on Cus Address and add it using the arrow button in the middle. Continue on by adding Cus Name, Items Description, Items Cost, Items Picture, and DIR Order Total. Then hit Next. I'm going to use the buttons on the right to reposition the fields on my form. I'm going to start with Order Number, followed by Customer ID, Cus Name, Cus Address, Item, Items Description, Items Cost, Count, DIR Order Total, and then Items Picture at the end. Hit Next, then Finish, and say OK to replace the form. Now, we want to test our property class extensions that we created previously. However, I remember that Mongoose defaults a right-click menu on the component level. Let's make sure before we test it that we remove that component level menu. With your Orders form open in Design Mode, select your Customer ID combo box and remove the right-click menu under the Behavior section of the Properties panel. Do the same for the Item combo box. Save your form and then reopen it in Runtime Mode. You'll notice now if you right-click on any one of those fields, the right-click menu is inheriting properly. Go ahead and add an order so we can see our bound properties working properly. Go ahead and create an order so we can see our bound properties in action. You'll notice that once you hit save, all of the joined properties will display the correct data. You can also see our derived field, DIR Order Total, calculating the total order amount. Now that everything here looks in order, let's make a few more changes to the form itself. Switch back to the Design Mode tab. Click on the item picture static and hit the delete key to delete the component. Since we're just displaying a picture, I only want the edit component. Drag the item picture edit to the right of the fields and change the type to static. Grab the corner and drag it out to make it bigger. And since static labels automatically come with a colon at the end, let's remove it by scrolling down to Miscellaneous in the Properties panel and set no colon to true. I also noticed that some of my labels don't have string values. Go ahead and create any missing strings by selecting the ellipsis on the caption field and selecting Yes to create them. Then hit the Regenerate Form button on the toolbar. Some form changes require you to save, close, and reopen the form to see those changes. You can use this button to do that. Switch back to the Runtime Mode tab and reopen our form so we can see our changes. Hit Refresh to query the data. And you can see that our picture property is displaying a caption which we don't want. So let's hop back over to Design Mode to remove this. Select our Items Picture Edit And you can either remove the caption in the caption field, or you can scroll down to Data Source under Formatting and set the Image and Text property to Image Only. Hit Save and then reopen the form in runtime mode to see the change we just made. And just like that, we were able to remove the caption from our image property. And as we cycle through our orders, all of our joined and derived properties are updating accordingly. Organize the form components until you have something that you're happy with. You can hold Control to select multiple items and use the positioning icons from the toolbar to align it with other components on the form. Once you found something you're happy with, go ahead and save your form. When it comes to using joined properties, you'll notice that the value will only update after save. Sometimes though, you want it to automatically update once you select an item. Let's say the user changes the customer ID, we want it to automatically update the customer name and address immediately before save. To do so, we can utilize a validator and a component class to do this. Switch back to the Design Mode tab and select Edit, Validators. Validators are global objects that can be used in multiple ways. They can be set up to validate a value, as well as return output values to the form for functions like displaying associated descriptions or setting downstream component defaults. Select the New icon to add a new validator, and let's name this Customer ID. Change the type to In Collection. And then click the ellipsis on the Parameters field. Set the IDO to our Customer IDO. Then select ellipsis for the Set Prop field below it. For an in-collection validator like this, Mongoose will format a where clause, comparing the values based on the current component's value versus the column's value. Mongoose executes a database query with an in-collection validator, so if other values are needed from the table, it's an efficient time to get them during this query. In our case, along with the validations, we want to bring back the customer name and customer address fields and place those onto the form. Select the ellipsis besides the Properties field, and then hit New. For the target, type in %1, and for the value, select Name from the drop list. In this scenario, we are using position parameters instead of name parameters. By not hardwiring the target, we're able to reuse this on multiple forms by passing in the component name wherever we're at. Hit OK, and then hit New to add another. Set the target to %2, and select Address for the value. Then select OK until you get back to the Validator Parameters modal. Then, under the In Collection Only section, click the ellipsis next to the Property field. And let's select our ID property. Then hit OK. Then, in the error message field, type in M is not a valid. This is a standard Mongoose error message that we can use. Click OK until you get back to the form. With our validator built, let's add a list source and some other attributes, and then package it up into a component class so it can be reused within our application. Use the Edit menu to browse global objects. Let's select Component Class. Click the New icon at the bottom, and let's name our component class Customer ID. Scroll down, and under the Data Source section, expand Validation and click the ellipsis in the Validators field. Click the Add button at the bottom, and add the Customer ID validator that we just created. We need to pass the %1 and %2 parameters to the validator. Doing this will effectively pass whatever was passed to the component class straight through to the validator. With the validator selected, click on the Parameters button at the bottom. Enter %1, %2, and click OK back to the Component Class Properties window. Then set Validate Immediately to True. The last thing we need to define on our component class is a list source. We're inheriting a list of ID and name from the Customer ID property class, but the Customer ID validator we created has an output of both the customer name property and address property. By default, for efficiency, when the user selects a value from the dropdown as opposed to typing a value in, Mongoose avoids making an actual round trip to query from the database. Assuming that the list entries are all valid values, we need a list source that includes not only the ID and name, but also the address in the list source. Click the ellipsis next to the list source field. For type, select IDO collection. Then select our customer IDO. Click on the ellipsis next to the properties field. Add the ID, name, and address properties. Then hit OK. We don't want to show the address field, we just want to have it available for our validator. So click the Columns to Display button. Hold Shift to select the ID and name properties, then hit OK. Hit OK until you return back to the home screen, then save your form, close it, and unload all the global form objects. With our validator and list source nicely packaged up into a component class, we can use this on our orders form. Reopen the orders form from the list of most recently used forms, and select the customer ID combo box. Expand the inheritance section and select the component class customer ID, which contains our validator and list source. In the component class parameters field below, type in cusName, space, cusAddress, which will receive our customer name and customer address properties. Since we also have an ID grid column, let's apply the same component class to the grid column as well. Select the grid component, then select the Edit Grid Columns button in the top left. Select the Customer ID grid column. Expand the inheritance section and assign it our Customer ID component class. Then pass in the cusName and cusAddress parameters below. Click OK and save your form. Let's reopen this form in runtime mode so we can test it out. Now when you select a different customer, the customer name and address will immediately output, thanks to our validator. We can also test this in our grid. Click on the grid splitter and drag it to expand. You'll notice once we change the ID that both the customer name and address will update there as well. Now let's repeat what we just did to the item combo box. Flip back to the Design Mode tab. Click Edit, Validator, and hit the new icon from the bottom. Let's name this validator item, then hit OK. Change the type to in collection, and then select the ellipsis for the parameters field. Select our items IDO. Click the ellipsis for the property field, and select item, then hit OK. Then select the ellipsis for the set prop field. Click the ellipsis on the properties field, and then hit new. This time we want to bring back the item description and item cost. So for target, type in %1 and then select description for the value. Hit OK and then hit new to add a second. For the target, type in %2 and then select cost for the value. Hit OK. Hit OK until you return back to the validator properties. For the error message, type in M is not a valid. Then hit OK. Now that the item validator is created, let's package this up into a component class to make it reusable. Select Edit Component Class from the menu. Then hit the new icon on the bottom, and let's name this item. Then hit OK. Expand the data source section, and then scroll down to Validation, and click the ellipsis on Validators. Let's add our item validator here. Select the item validator, and then hit the Parameters button at the bottom. Type in %1, %2, and then hit OK. Hit OK again to return back to the component class properties. Set Validate immediately to True, then click the ellipsis for the list source field. Set the type to IDO collection, and then select our items IDO. Click the properties ellipsis, and let's add item, description, and cost, then hit OK. Select the columns to display ellipsis, and hold Shift to select item and description, then hit OK. Hit OK to return back to the component class properties. Click OK to return back to the main screen. And now let's apply our component class to our item combo box. Click the item combo box component and expand the inheritance section. Select item from the list. For the component class parameters, type in ITMS description, ITMS cost to pass in our description and cost properties. Let's apply that same component class to our grid column. Select the grid component and select the Edit Grid Columns button in the top left corner. Select the item grid column, then expand the inheritance section. Select our item component class and pass in the same parameters, ITMS description, ITMS cost. Then hit OK and save your form. Let's test this. Switch back over to the Runtime Mode tab, close your form, and unload all the global form objects from Form Definition. Then reopen your form from the list of recently used forms. Select an item from the list, and notice that the item description and cost will immediately update. Let's do the same to our grid column. Expand it by dragging the splitter, and change the item. You'll notice that the description and cost change here as well. And that wraps up Part 5. In Part 6, we will learn how to create a chart, and we'll touch on creating a form script and attaching it to an event. We will also start laying the groundwork for our store portal by importing images and expanding on our theme. For more tutorials and documentation, check out the Mongoose portal at mongoose.infor.com. Thanks for watching.